The jury trial, the right to be judged by fellow citizens. It's in the Constitution 3 times. Once in Article 3, again in the 6th Amendment, and again in the 7th Amendment. The Constitution didn't create the idea. A crisis of faith centuries before did. It took 6 years to build something new, but afterwards it reshaped power for centuries to come. Our story starts with the old system and ends with the silent way the jury trial is being turned to one-man decisions once again. This new, singular justice put a teenager away in solitary confinement for years because of a backpack. And the way the Supreme Court has ruled, it could happen to you too. I'll explain all this by simply telling you a few stories, with the first being about how God's judgment stopped working. Cornwall, England, February 1201. Cold and overcast. The king's justices have come to Lancaster, traveling judges who ride from county to county, hearing cases, collecting fines, enforcing the king's law. They've set up court in the castle bailey, wooden benches, trestle tables, a raised seat for the presiding justice. Villagers pack in, some summoned, some watching. A woman steps forward. Hawise, a widow. Her husband Brickmere was killed. She speaks. I appeal Roger of Wick of the death of my husband. 2 men step forward from the crowd. John of Winelton, Ralph of Mertherin. Neighbors. He fled, they say. We saw him. The justice turns to 3 groups of men standing near the front. These are the hundreds. Not a number, but a name. 100 is a district, a subdivision of the county. Each 100 sends 12 sworn men to speak for their community. Carrier 100, Penwith 100. What say the hundreds? Did he flee? The men from Carrier confer quietly. Then their spokesman answers, the flight is not testified by us. Penwith says the same. The accusation stands. The witnesses say Roger fled. The hundreds, the local jurors who know everyone in their districts, cannot confirm it. The case is uncertain. The justice pronounces, it is considered that he purged himself by water. Roger is taken to its stone-lined pool outside. A priest in white vestments stands beside it, murmuring prayers in Latin, blessing the water. Roger's hands are bound with rope. He's lowered in, slowly. If the blessed water accepts him, if he sinks, he's innocent. If it rejects him, if he floats, he's guilty. Roger goes under. Bubbles rise. Long silence. He sinks. Hands pull him up. He's gasping, shivering. The priest makes the sign of the cross. Nods to the justice. Back inside the hall, the clerk dips his quill. Writes, he is purged. Hawise stands frozen, missing her husband, and silent. Roger, dripping and cold, is released. 12 men step forward. These are his pledges, his sureties, to guarantee his future conduct. The ordeal is decided, not by the widow, not by the witnesses, not by the hundreds, but by God. This was the system. For 50 years, England had used a 2-stage process. Stage 1, neighbors accuse, sworn men from each 100, local juries, present the names of suspected criminals. Stage 2, God decides. The accused goes to the ordeal. There were different ordeals. The cold water ordeal, what Roger just went through. The hot water ordeal, plunging your hand into a boiling cauldron to retrieve a stone. The hot iron ordeal, carrying a piece of red-hot metal several paces. For the hot ordeals, the test came days later. The hand was bandaged. After 3 days, a priest unwrapped it. If the wound was healing cleanly, you were innocent. If it was festering, you were guilty. The system worked because everyone believed God would intervene. The accused believed it. The community believed it. The result was divine, therefore final. But the priest controlled the ritual, and that meant he controlled the outcome. He prepared the fire in private. He sprinkled holy water over the ordeal cauldron. He removed the cauldron from the fire during Mass and drew out his prayers. Observers stood at a distance, and it was the priest who judged the final outcome, whether the hand had truly been burned. The severity of the ordeal also varied. A 1-fold ordeal meant reaching to the wrist. A 3-fold ordeal meant reaching to the elbow, reserved for more serious crimes. If the priest thought you were likely innocent, he had ways to help. Cool the fire, lengthen the prayers, judge the wound generously. If he thought you were guilty, or if you'd crossed him, he had ways to ensure God's judgment went the other way. Whatever the priest did or didn't do to tilt the scales, what mattered was what the people saw. The written record of Hawaii's case is only a few lines in the king's roll: that she appealed Roger of Wick for killing her husband Brickmere, that the local hundreds could not testify to his flight, and that it is considered that he purged himself by water. He is purged. The additional details, the position of the judge, the interaction among the villagers, the stone weight, the prayers, were reconstructed from contemporary descriptions of how water ordeals were actually performed. This form of justice was so common and so well documented that its rhythms are unmistakable. God working through the priest working through ritual. It was sacred. It was final. And then it ended. The end came from Rome. But before the Catholic Church acted, the winds of change were already blowing inside the king's realm. England, 1214. King John returns from France, defeated, humiliated, broke. He'd lost the war, lost Normandy, and lost the treasury fighting to get it back. Now he needs money. He turns to his barons, the powerful landholders, the men who control the countryside, who raise armies, who owe the king service and payments in exchange for their lands. He demands payments and demands more. The barons refuse. By spring of 1215, they've organized and armed. In May, they capture London. John has no army that can take it back. The two sides agree to meet, neutral ground, a meadow on the Thames, between the king's castle at Windsor and the city the barons now hold. Runnymede, June 15th, 1215. John arrives with what remains of his retinue. Across the field, barons in full military strength. Archbishop Stephen Langton has drafted a document. Langton is the highest church official in England, but he doesn't work for the king. He works for Rome. The Pope appointed him over John's objection just 2 years earlier. Now this Pope's man stands between the king and the barons, holding a charter. 63 clauses, limits on the king's power, protections for the barons' rights, and one clause that aims for a particular guarantee. Clause 39. No free man shall be imprisoned or stripped of his rights except by the lawful judgment of his peers. Not the king's judges, not the king's men, but peers. John has no choice. He sets his seal to the document. The barons renew their oaths of allegiance. The crisis appears resolved, but John has no intention of honoring it. 2 years earlier, when John was excommunicated and desperate for the Pope's support, he had surrendered England to Rome, signed a charter making himself the Pope's vassal, his kingdom a papal possession in exchange for protection. Now he calls in that debt. He writes to Pope Innocent III and asks him to void the charter the barons forced on him. August 24th, 1215, the Pope replies. He calls Magna Carta shameful and demeaning. He declares it null and void. He forbids the king to observe it and the barons to enforce it, on pain of excommunication. The document is dead, but the same Pope who killed the charter is about to kill something else. In 1215 in England, there was no real separation of church and state. Even before King John gave control to the Pope, the church controlled education. Nearly every literate person had been trained by clergy. It controlled record keeping. Monks and priests were the scribes. It controlled the calendar. Holy days were one of the few days courts didn't sit. And it controlled the definition of truth itself. When Roger of Wick, the man accused of murder, subjected to a trial by ordeal, went into that blessed pool in Cornwall, a priest had to be there, not as a courtesy, as a necessity, because the ordeal wasn't a legal procedure. It was a sacrament. The water had to be blessed. The ritual had to follow church formula. The prayers had to be said correctly. Without the priest performing the rite, you weren't asking God for judgment. You were just throwing someone in a pond. The community believed in the ordeal because the church said God would answer. The king's courts used the ordeal because everyone, nobles, peasants, sheriffs, judges, believed the priest could make God speak. The priest was the bridge between earthly justice and divine truth, which meant the church had a veto over the entire system. And in November 1215, it used that veto. November 1215, Rome. Pope Innocent III convenes the Fourth Lateran Council, the largest church gathering in centuries, hundreds of bishops, and dozens of canons aimed at reforming Christendom. Doctrine, clergy conduct, court procedures, and one rule tucked among many. No cleric may decree or pronounce a sentence involving the shedding of blood, nor may anyone confer a rite of blessing or consecration on a purgation by ordeal of boiling or cold water, or of the red-hot iron. Theologians like Peter the Chanter had been arguing for years. Ordeals force God to perform miracles on command. They test God, and that is forbidden. The council agreed. One line, buried among many. Priests may no longer bless the ordeal. The decree goes out across Christendom. Priests receive the instruction. Some comply immediately. Back in England, the machinery of justice grinds to a halt. A sheriff receives word of a murder. He summons the 100 jury. They present a suspect. The sheriff orders the ordeal. The priest refuses. What now? The suspect sits in a cell. Weeks pass. Courts adjourn cases. Sheriffs write to Westminster asking for guidance. But Westminster has no answer to give. England is at war. The barons never accepted the Pope's annulment of Magna Carta. Neither did King John accept its limits on his power. By the spring of 1216, a French prince has landed with an army. London belongs to the rebels. The country is tearing itself apart. October 1216. King John, campaigning in the east of England, falls ill. He dies at Newark Castle on the night of October 18th. A violent storm rages overhead. His 9-year-old son is crowned Henry III 10 days later. The war grinds on. The regency speaks for the child king, but there is no clear answer on what to do with the accused who keep piling up in jails across England. Some courts fall back on compurgation, the old system of oaths. The accused swears innocence and brings oath helpers to support him. But for serious crimes, murder, rape, robbery, this feels inadequate. Everyone knows oaths can be lies. Accused criminals sit in cells, or they're released on pledges, or they flee. For 4 years, England has accusation without judgment, presentment without verdict. The question no one can answer, if God won't decide, who will? Westminster, January 1219. The king, Henry III, is 12 years old. Real power, however, rests with the justiciar, Hubert de Burgh, and the royal council. They're preparing to send out the ire. The word ire, from the Latin iter, means journey, and justice did travel. When the king's justices came to your county, it was an event. Years might pass between visits. When they arrived, everyone came, summoned or watching. Local officials surrendered their insignia as if the king himself had appeared. The justices heard cases, yes, but they also audited sheriffs, investigated misconduct, and collected every fine and fee the crown was owed. Some people feared the ire. In Cornwall, men fled into the woods when they heard the justices were coming. But this ire will be different. It's the first since the church banned the ordeal 4 years ago. Instructions must be issued. The judges need to know what to do. A clerk reads the draft order aloud. It mentions the ending of the ordeal. It mentions that the judges must rely on discretion and act wisely. The judges will have to improvise. But in general, persons accused of grave crimes, robbery, murder, arson, who might do harm if suffered to abjure the realm, are to be kept in prison. Not harsh imprisonment that endangers life or limb, but custody. If the crimes are of a middling sort and the accused would have gone to the ordeal, if the ordeal had not been abolished, they may abjure the realm. If the crimes are small, they must find pledge to keep the peace. Then someone asks the question, and trial? The order says nothing about trial, nothing about how to determine guilt or innocence, because no one knows yet. But the machinery is moving. The judges ride out. Cases must be heard. Decisions must be made. And in those decisions, something new begins to emerge. A February morning, 1221. Gloucester. Mist clings low to the Severn Valley. Smoke rises from hearth fires in crooked lines above the town's timber houses. Then trumpets, sharp, metallic. The justices in ire are here. 6 of them ride through the narrow lanes toward Gloucester Castle. Cloaks heavy with winter wool, banner bearing the royal arms. Behind them, clerks on pack horses carrying rolls, inkhorns, wax, and wooden chests full of the king's records. Inside the castle, the makeshift courtroom is ready. Planks laid across the trestles for tables. Benches arranged, an elevated seat for the presiding justice. This is law on the move, rough, improvised, brought to the people by the authority of the crown. A sheriff's officer steps forward, unrolls a parchment, begins reading names. 12 men from the 100 of Kifsgate. 12 men step forward from the crowd, caps in hand. Farmers mostly, a carpenter, the blacksmith from Campton. Not lawyers, not advocates, neighbors. The presiding justice looks down at them. He speaks. What pleas of the crown do you present? The foreman, Thomas, a miller from Campton, clears his throat. My lord, William the Weaver killed Roger the shepherd. Thomas continues. At Campton, the day after Christmas, they were drinking at the alehouse, John Miller's place. They quarreled. About what? A woman, my lord. Roger's sister. William wanted her to wife. Roger said no. Go on. William drew his knife, stabbed Roger in the throat. Roger fell, died before midnight. The clerk scratches rapidly. The justice's face shows nothing. Where is William? Fled, my lord. That same night, we sent men after him at dawn. Found no trace. Do you suspect any other man? No, my lord. We all saw it. 20 men were in the alehouse. The justice turns to the other 11 jurors standing behind Thomas. Do you agree with this? They nod. One speaks up. It's as Thomas says, my lord. We saw the body. We know what happened. The clerk writes in the margin, malacreditor. He is suspected. Then come the practical questions. Not about William's guilt. The neighbors already know what happened. But about the systems that failed to prevent his escape. About the property he left behind. About whether the crown is owed money. William's chattels? What were they worth? A knife, my lord, the one he used. A cloak, 2 tunics, a pot. Perhaps 6 pence, all told. Who has them? The reeve took them, my lord. When a felon flees, his property is forfeit to the crown. The clerk writes, Vesicomus respondeat. The sheriff must account for 6 pence. Finally, the justice pronounces, let William be exacted and outlawed. 5 times, William's name will be called in the county court. If he doesn't appear, he becomes outlagadus, outside the law. His life is worth nothing. Any man may kill him. The clerk records it all, every detail. This roll will go to the exchequer in Westminster. The sheriff will have to account for that 6 pence. Campton will have to pay its fine. The justice looks back to the jurors. Next case. The jury system that emerged in 1221 evolved over centuries, no longer built around the words and actions of a priest, but rather the determination of individual members of the community. And by the time the American colonists built their own government, they knew exactly what needed to be included. Philadelphia, summer 1787, the Constitutional Convention. 55 delegates locked in debate for months. They're building a new government from scratch. How much power for Congress? How much for the states? How much for the president? And what about the courts? Article 3 goes into the draft. Section 2 includes this line, the trial of all crimes, except in cases of impeachment, shall be by jury. Criminal trials, juries required. But when the Constitution is published in September, no Bill of Rights. No list of individual protections. The opposition erupts. Virginia, June 1788. Patrick Henry stands in the ratifying convention, thundering, the rights of conscience, trial by jury, liberty of the press, all pretensions to human rights and privileges are rendered insecure, if not lost, by this change. He warns what Congress might do without a Bill of Rights. They may introduce the practice of France, Spain, and Germany of torturing to extort a confession of the crime. Pennsylvania. The minority at the ratifying convention, 23 delegates who voted against the Constitution, published a dissent. Among their demands, trial by jury shall remain as heretofore, as well as in the federal courts, as in those of the several states, and a speedy trial by an impartial jury of his vicinage, without whose unanimous consent he cannot be found guilty. The Federalists pushed back. Alexander Hamilton, writing as Publius in Federalist number 83, argues the Constitution already protects criminal jury trials. As for civil trials, the rules vary too much from state to state to write one rule for all. It doesn't work. State after state ratifies the Constitution, but sends lists of proposed amendments with their ratification. Every state convention except Maryland's recommends changes. The message is clear. The people want guarantees, and jury trial is on nearly every list. James Madison has doubts. He thinks the Constitution is fine as written. The government has only the powers listed, so a Bill of Rights is unnecessary. Worse, any list of rights will be incomplete. And what happens to the rights you leave out? But the political pressure is undeniable. Promises were made. If he doesn't act, the whole constitutional project could unravel. June 8, 1789. Madison stands in the House of Representatives. He's newly elected from Virginia. He's brought a list of proposed amendments, and among them, 2 amendments dealing with a system where fellow citizens, not judges or clergy, decide guilt or innocence. In the 6th Amendment, in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed. And in the 7th Amendment, in suits at common law, where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved. Jury trial listed in the 6th Amendment for criminal trials, and then preserved for civil trials in the 7th Amendment. Combined with Article 3, the Constitution now guarantees trial by jury 3 times. But there's a difference between guaranteeing and actually carrying it out. The Bronx, 2010. Khalif Browder is 16 years old, walking home from a party. Police stop him. A man claims Khalif stole his backpack weeks earlier. Khalif says he didn't. He's arrested, charged with robbery. Bail is set at $3,000. His family can't pay, so Khalif goes to Rikers Island to wait for trial. He waits and waits. The 6th Amendment promises a speedy trial. Khalif never gets one. Prosecutors offer plea deals. Plead guilty, go home. Khalif refuses. He wants his jury trial, the one the Constitution guarantees. Months pass, then a year, then 2. Khalif spends nearly 2 years in solitary confinement, 23 hours a day in a cell, for a backpack, without a trial. He's beaten by guards, beaten by other inmates. He attempts suicide. After 3 years, the prosecution drops all charges. No trial, no jury, no conviction. Khalif walks out, but Rikers doesn't leave him. Khalif Browder hangs himself at his mother's home. He is 22 years old. The Constitution guarantees trial by jury 3 times, but guarantees require enforcement. Today, over 97% of federal criminal cases end in plea bargains. No jury ever seated. No neighbors ever asked to decide. The system has found quieter ways to bypass what the founders wrote. Cash bail? If you can't pay, you wait in a cell. Weeks, months, years, until the pressure to plead becomes unbearable. A prosecutor's leverage. Accept the deal or face mandatory minimums that could bury you. Court backlogs. The speedy trial promise dissolves into endless delays. One by one, these mechanisms move the decision from 12 citizens to one prosecutor's office, to one judge. In 1201, a priest controlled the ordeal, his hands, his prayers, his judgment. In 1221, neighbors took that power. 12 men from the 100 decided guilt or innocence. 8 centuries later, the jury trial is still in the Constitution. But for Khalif Browder, 16, accused, unable to pay, it was never more than words on parchment. He wanted his trial. He never got it. The Constitution promised judgment by fellow citizens. The system now is somehow delivering solitary confinement. To learn about other quiet mechanisms that can and often do impact your life, and not always for the better, check out my Plain Meaning channel on YouTube for more episodes. And if you watch them all, don't worry, because I release a new one every Tuesday.